Hello, I'm miltonchang of Bonsaiheirloom. At a hot sunny day, that's why I'm squinting. That I'm really pleased that we are building now a community of bonsai hobbyists. This way, your Q&A encourages me to think about topics that are of interest to you and that can be helpful to you. And also your comments wind up sharing good feedback with each other, and so that we are truly benefiting from each other as a community. So please add your comments below, as well as sending Q&A questions for me to answer. It stimulates my thinking so that I can give you better answers in the future, or better topics in the future. So the first question I have is from Drake Kaiser. And where can I get a Nishiki pine? Well, funny, when you sent me this, I went on to Amazon, and there's actually a couple of places we're selling Nishiki pine, although one of them is out of stock. So they are available. They are difficult to find, especially cutting-grown Nishiki pine without the ugly graft mark. You can find them readily in Japan because a lot of people are doing it, even though the yield is very low. Probably much less than 10% of the trees cuttings that you do will survive. But the grafted ones, oftentimes, it's a grafted too high, so you have a big lump up on top and a skinny trunk in the bottom. So learn how to do graft, and you can graft it yourself really low, or buy one. And but too bad in Japan we cannot import them without going through a lot of hoop jumping. Short of that, I recommend two kinds of Japanese black pine. The pine you get here that from old seedlings, in a sense of a seedling grown in America, the bark is rough, but not really that rough. It doesn't fissure. And so I recommend Arakawa and Mikawa pines. Both are more readily available because there are seeds available, and they really are beautiful when they cork, not cork, but fissure. And someday I will show you one Arakawa pine, which is now about 80-some years old, because a young lady at the time got it from Japan, the seeds, when she came out of a concentration camp, and then planted a tree. In fact, she started a 1-acre farm in Fresno, but now she's gone. And that tree is really beautiful fissure. So in some sense, that's a historic tree, someone that came out of their internment camp and planted that tree. So anyway, try Arakawa and Mikawa. The Mikawa has a characteristic that it's more likely to branch out from trunks and inside branches without the green. So that's a very desirable feature to make a bonsai. The next one is from Butkus, anyway. I see you're using drip watering system or similar in background. Can you describe how you use and so forth? So I will show you later on a drip head. First of all, you can buy drip controller from Amazon for anywhere from $20 to $60 for a nice one, made by Rainbird, which I recommend, and hook it up and basically be watered, to hook it up to a faucet. And your bonsai will be watered very regularly if you take trips or something. I used to use the drip line where the water comes out at the regular intervals. But there are two problems with that. Sometimes they clog over time due to the hard water. And the second problem is that when I want to move the tree around the bonsai, I have to unhook it and cut it, and oftentimes it's really hard to push it back in. So now I just use a drip head so that it can be just pulled out and plug it back when you put the tree someplace else. The next one is from Ceylon Zambabe, and I think this fellow is from Ceylon. I cut off all my branches, not sure why I was thinking, but I got tired of growing long, skinny branches, very little bit of leaves. So my guess is that you kept your tree too much in the shade. So it's trying to seek light, and so it grows tall and skinny. And so the thing to do is to put your tree in the shade. So for example, now you have a skinny trunk, and assuming it's a deciduous tree, like an elm, you can cut it at the right height of where your bonsai wants to be, a little bit shorter than the bonsai you want it to grow into. So the lower branches will come out, and then you can have a tree to work on to shape it to your desire. Now, on the other hand, Bunjin style can be very free-flowing. It's more like an artistic design. So you can have a long stick if you have a very shallow pot and a long stick slanted tree, and then you try to balance the top. It could look quite nice. So I think the point about styling is that there's no right way or wrong way. It's your way, it's the right way for you. And when you have lemon, make lemonade, don't worry about it. Just make the most of what you have on hand. And that's a good philosophy in life. Otherwise we'll keep complaining and not satisfied with what we got. It's to make the most of what you got, okay? It's the same thing with shaping your bonsai. The next one is from the Wizard Cody. As someone who aspired to do bonsai but lives in a small apartment, do you have any recommendation for plants that can put bonsai indoors? I'm really interested in Camellia japonica. Well, Camellia japonica, you can buy a 5 or 15 gallon camellia, not horribly expensively. And if you buy Susquehanna, the leaves are pretty small. There's a small variety of camellia, but I assume you want camellia because the flowers are very pretty. But the small leaf camellias tend to have small flowers, so they're not as showy. One way to address the question about keeping bonsai as a house plant indoor is to get several plants and keep them outside. And then you can take them in, rotating them inside the house, so you always have one display. But bonsai trees, by and large, are for outdoor. Even house plants that are primarily grown under the jungle in the wild, they don't do really well in deep shade in a house. So most trees, for sure, almost all the trees wants to be outdoor, get sufficient amount of sunlight. So, but you're rotating them, it's okay to be in the shade. Let's say it's almost like raining for a week or two, it's okay. But not for long in the house, it's not gonna work. There are similarities between houseplant and bonsai, and someday I'll do an analogy to say that bonsai can be really a houseplant. Now, you mentioned that you live in a small apartment or small house. What I would suggest is to plant your bonsai in growing pots, like nursery pots, and keep them outdoor. And if you don't have any patio or veranda, then what you can do is build a window box, like what they do in Europe, and set your plants out there. Let's say if you have 5 bonsai plants growing in nursery pots, and put them into bonsai pots sometimes, or several of them in the bonsai pots, then you can rotate them into the house. But the ones you kept in the growing pots, they will grow much faster to get your thicker trunk to become a more respectable bonsai. Your channel is awesome. Can we do a video on oak bonsai? Well, funny you should ask. Today we will do an oak bonsai. It's a volunteer oak that the guy dug it up from his garden. He didn't know what to do with it. He was ready to throw out. And I bought it, and I grew it really not much more than 6 months or so. And I think the shaping that can be quite a wonderful bonsai. So I would do that. Yes, I would do a bonsai using oak tree. I have a European field maple that grows vigorously in a nursery pot. I plan to repot it next year into bonsai, but should I prune the leaves or just leave it, let it grow out? Well, I think you should leave it grow it out until you're ready to make it into a bonsai. And I think the best time is to do it when the leaves are gone, so you can know you can see clearly where you're going with the branches, and then you can prune the branches and roots back, and then put it in a smaller bonsai pot with the right soil, and to get started. I don't have personal experience with the European field maple. Almost all maple can be grown for a bonsai. I think that's a very vigorous maple, so you may have to do repotting more frequently. But hey, tell me what your experience is. I can share with the community. I think that would be good for your colleagues in Europe to benefit from this feedback. I just got an olive tree from my orchard. For soil, would you recommend your general mix of 111 of sandy loam, peat moss, and perlite, or 112? Also, the tree has been neglected and a lot of dead branches. Should I prune the roots now or wait for it to recover? Again, you have to cognizant of your watering habits. I think I would recommend 112. Although one reader's feedback is the olive tree is basically growing in very drought Mediterranean weather. And, what the Mediterranean weather just means it rains in the wintertime, which could be quite rainy, could be quite wet. So I don't think necessarily olives thrives in dry weather or dry sand, dry land, but they can withstand droughtness because it's probably got pretty decent roots going down to get the moisture below. As far as in your case, that's already dug, I would grow it as much in a growing pot, keeping as much roots as possible, maybe reducing some of the branches that you will never use, but let it recover, put it in the shade to start, and gradually move into the sun. And when it's growing vigorously, you can cut it back. And I would really discourage you from cutting back much of the roots, because I know some people do a very interesting experiment which works. I've never done it, but you may read up on it on the web, is that they actually wind up planting the tree upside down with the branches going in the ground. They cover it with soil, and actually branches will come out in the top, in the roots, to become a bushy bonsai very quickly. I have never done it, but it seemed to make sense because oftentimes the water flow is reversible. Not all trees, but I think most trees are. And so that is one way to forcing olive to grow a very dense forest bonsai. That also points out to the fact that my guess is that likely you can do root cutting for olive because it shows that there are hidden buds inside the root so that you can do root cutting. So, that's what I would recommend, but what you do is depending on how vigorous is your cutting or what you dug up. When dead branches are left on a tree and exposed to years of rain and watering, is there a risk of them rotting and developing fungus? Love your video, by the way. Well, it's possible, and I think if you worry about that in that you're living in a very wet and hot area, I would probably discourage you from doing that. Here in California, it's with the Mediterranean weather. We don't really have the rot problem that you talked about. So talk to your local nurseryman, they will know about it, but I don't think it's a problem because within reason, if you kind of keep it clean or sterile, I think the rot will be quite controllable. It will give us some interesting feature. In fact, I think likelihood is that you'll be able to grow moss in it to make it very, very interesting. Always look forward to your Q&A session. It'd be great. Would be great if you could talk us through your automatic drip system. Plus, I've noticed drip line in the background in your video. As I said, buy a drip controller from Amazon or wherever, and then sprinkler head, mini sprinkler head instead of a mini sprayer head instead of a drip line to avoid clogging. Hello, Mr. Chang. I would like to ask you what to do when the moss gets too thick and takes away from the soil and good from the tree. And it also blooms very quickly and clings to the tree trunk. Well, I think you have a wonderful situation. I don't see it as a problem, as an opportunity to really have moss that looks like a green lawn. I'm sure the moss would take up some growth, some fertilizer, but there's plenty of fertilizers to go around. If I were you, I would water a little bit more. Sometimes I would actually put pelletized chicken manure on it because that's organic. It's spread over, and then the moss will grow onto it as well. And the moss just takes off really quick. So you can always control by, pull some off and restart again. But you have a wonderful situation. Like life, everything is half empty versus half full. Have fun. It's fine. Great video as always. I'm glad you people love it. Can you talk a little about your fertilizer? I would love to understand your thorough process. Well, for amateur, which I am, the simplest recommendation I have is use liquid fertilizer in accordance with the instruction, maybe reduce the concentration to half the rate of fertilizer and all that. And I recommend the fish and kelp that you can buy a gallon bottle from Amazon. It's got micronutrients and organic material that would grow very well. Like I said, during the summer, I follow the instruction and do water fertilize once a week. But other times, as it cools off, I fertilize every other week or even once a month. Other slow-release fertilizer, like slow-release lawn food, or the popular commercial varieties of slow-release fertilizer should work just fine. Again, follow instruction, maybe a half concentration, or for that matter, Miracle-Gro. Another wonderful video, that's from Shane Garden Loving. I would love to see a long, in-depth video about pots. We'd love to hear your philosophy about choosing your pots for seedling, training and displays. How often do you repot, and do trees often get to a point where they will always grow in the same pot indefinitely? Okay, boy, that's a lot of questions. Number one, to grow in seedlings, I would say growing in any growing pots, nursery pots, they're good. You don't want to pot your seedling trees or saplings too early because you want it to grow, branch out, and cut back to thicken the trunk and taper them. So, and to start seedling, I would say the best is like 1 part perlite and 1 part vermiculite, and that's sterile. And I'll share with you one thing I just learned from trying to germinate seeds. I always imagine trees like to be, the seeds like to be kept wet. So I always want to put in a little bit of water in a peat moss to put my seeds in, such as maple or for that matter, ume and so forth. Well, it turns out very small amount of them germinates that you're doing that. And I finally figured out it could very well be, and I put it in the refrigerator to refrigerate. But I think it's because they mold and I want to killing the seed. So the way to do it is to clean off all the rest of it, in a sense, the pulp and the cover, and then putting in a after them dried in the shade, put them in a Ziploc and put in the refrigerator for 30 or 60 days. And the germination rate should be very high if you first use vermiculite and perlite. And then when the trees get to a certain size, then you want to, again, train in a bigger nursery pot, let's say 5 gallon or 1 gallon. If you live in an apartment, you can do it in 1 gallon. You can do 10 small bonsai, really with requiring very little space. But I say 5 gallon tree is easy one, so they won't dry out and they will grow quickly. And so that's what I would do. And the other 2 questions relating to pots. One is how do you choose pots in the sense of when you want to do a bonsai pot, you really want to harmonize with the tree. And it's easy to go with theory, but at the end of the day, it's probably better to have a few extra pots around and try it to see if it works and find the one that's optimum. But John Naka has a very good principle, which he said, first of all, the tree wants to be a little taller than the width of the pot, but the trunk should be about the thickness of the pot. So that gives you some idea to roughly how you begin, but ultimately the proof's in the pudding, how the tree looks like in a pot. So have a few extra pots around, get them at auctions or for sale at the club or for that matter, go to a swap meet and look at some of the pottery pots. And something may just, you don't necessarily have to stick to the Chinese traditional pots. But if you do go to the Chinese traditional pots, it's to stick with the darker color ones. That's from the only one notable place in China that produces good bonsai pots, which is Yixing. And that's a province that's where the city that all of the good pots are produced. And the best clay is called a jisa, which is that they call it, a direct translation is purple sand. It's really not. It's a dark, bright color. And the pots are very durable. When you knock it, it resonates. That means it's very solid. It doesn't break easy, and it's something you will enjoy to complement your tree. And the last thing is that how often do you repot? Basically, the process is the following. You have a very shallow pot, so when the tree grows roots, it wind up curl around. And gradually the top of the roots grow together because it's like touching the next root, and eventually becomes a solid blocks of wood. They fuse together. And so pretty soon what you really have is a solid block of wood with the roots below, and they're all curled up. There's really not much absorption for water. So there are two things you can do. One is you trim off a layer at the bottom, and that gets rid of the curling, and then for the fibrous roots to start again. Don't cut off too much aggressively. If you're in doubt, save it. And then if it really gets to be too root bound, you put it in a bigger pot so the roots will grow out, more fibrous roots will grow out. So you can put it back in a bonsai pot with fibrous roots to feed the tree. And if it's really overgrown and the hard part becomes too thick, it takes up unnecessary space for the pot. What you can do is say you put it in a deep pot, let the roots grow out, and take a reciprocal saw or chainsaw, cut off the bottom wood, and so it will be fed by the fibrous roots on the side, and then fibrous roots will grow out where you cut off all of the dead wood, and then then you can cut it the sides and put it in a smaller pot. So simply put, that's the process, but someday I'll do a video to explain all this more thoroughly with illustration. Please watch my repotting video throughout the channel so far. Hello, Mr. Chang, would your potting mix well in Pennsylvania as well? And again, I said you should if you water once a day and make sure it doesn't cake up on the top in the sense of it's loose. And I think that should work fine. But again, you may choose to use your locally available material, so long as you have a soil to hold the medium to hold the soil, and drainage to allow water to retain water and let air through. I think you'll do just fine. And fertilizer from time to time. Can you please advise me on the style for my Crabapple, about 3 years old now, still in training? I don't know what you mean by Crabapple. The only thing I can think of in Japanese, crabapple is called kaido. So you probably means, what do I do with my apple tree, 3-year-old seedling? Well, assuming it's a crabapple tree, what I recommend you do for beginner is to let it grow into a formal upright. That means let the tree grow, or tilt it a little bit, let it grow up, so there's a lot of leaves up on top and some branches at the bottom. That's called formal or informal upright. And as you go, you're beginning to see one of the readers' feedback is to see the order out of the chaos. That means see the flow of the line, the design line, out of the chaos of many, many branches. You can cut the rest off and follow the line, and that's how you design wonderful bonsais that are unique to your imagination. And that's what I encourage people to do, is to follow the tradition, but transcend that to do it your way. to make it your kind of a style, to make it truly an American artist rather than a traditional craftsman outcome. This one is from Matthew Pedigo. Okay, he's a pedigree. Thank you very much, Milton, for your content. I appreciate it very much. I wonder what is your best tip for keeping yamadori alive as a terrible success rate with collected trees. I believe it's big because of lack of root development. By the way, I hail from your neck. I may hail you from the neck of your woods and have remodeled my homes in this area. Thank you. Oh, okay, so he's from my area and he killed many trees he dug up from the wild. Well, you know, I had similar experience. I follow Harry and others, Harry Hirao, to go out and take California juniper, let's say 40, 50 years ago, and I killed very many of them because there are a lot of myths about not overwatering and use the local materials such as decomposed granite. It really is silly. What I recommend you do is following. Think of your yamadori as a cutting, a big cutting from the root, from the wild. But you have an advantage because you have some roots there. And so what I would recommend you do is to plant them in a shade or semi-shade, like morning sun a little bit, and in a large amount of perlite and a little bit of vermiculite to retain the water. So you have a very good airy cutting medium, in a sense, a medium for growing cuttings. I think you should increase from 20% to 80%. That's what I would recommend you do. And by the way, since we are local, I love to buy some of the yamadori you dig up. You know, I will even go out to dig with you. I still am interested, even at my age, I am interested in increasing my collection because it's a very creative process. So let me encourage people to work on bonsai, starting off with more mature trees. Buy a bigger nursery tree, dig up garden trees, and then maybe dig out from you know, your friends. Like here, you have the hilly areas, private land, and then maybe get permit to go dig up from national forests and national forests. Yeah. The point is the following: if you start with a little bonsai, it takes a very long time to become a good-looking, respectable bonsai. But if you start with an ugly trunk and then you build on it, you can get a very, very nice bonsai with a big trunk, respectable bonsai in probably 5 years' time. Just imagine you have a little tree growing out of the trunk, okay, the stump. And that tree, that little bud should grow to about this tall in a year. That's how much a 1 gallon tree will grow. And just imagine you got some good material to train with after a couple of years of growth. And after 5 years, you have a very respectable bonsai, just like some of mine. So do start with more mature material rather than the idea of starting a bonsai from a little seedling. It doesn't work that way. It's romantic, but it doesn't work that way because it will take too long. And I have good friends start a bonsai at the same time as I did. They did that. They started with small plant and very quickly put them in bonsai pots. After 30 years, they have nothing to show for it. Well, I really enjoy talking to you about my experience. I'm very open, trying to be helpful. I have no axe to grind. So please keep the questions coming. That's how we create a community and you can be contributing to creating the community of plant lovers that we can all help each other improve on our techniques rather than follow the blind tradition and make no improvements. So please keep the questions coming. Click like if you think my video is useful and comment below and subscribe to our channel and we'll keep you posted and together we'll do some good for the bonsai community. Thank you.